Greetings, this is Griff Ruby with part 61 on my series, Ecclesiology for Sedevacantists, based on the Dogmatic Theology, Volume 2, Christ Church, by Msgr G. Van Noort. Continuing, page 181. Application of the marks of unity and Catholicity to the various churches. Proposition 1. The mark of unity and Catholicity cannot be verified in either the Eastern or the Reformation, and I would add, or Novus Ordo, churches. Proof. The Phocian and Reformation churches may be, and Novus Ordo may be considered either collectively or singly. 1. If either group of churches is considered collectively, they evidently lack unity, both unity of membership and unity of government. For they are made up of many churches, of which the Novus Ordo is just one more, which are completely independent. If they do not possess unity, they necessarily lack that kind of Catholicity with which Christ ornamented his church. 2. If all these churches be considered singly, that is, each individual Phocian, Novus Ordo, and individual Protestant church, they obviously lack Catholicity, for each of these churches is for the most part confined within the boundaries of a single country, except, well, the Novus Ordo, of course, inherited all of our resources around the world, so they kind of came in. It's sort of like being born into privilege kind of a thing. A spoiled brat born into privilege, I might add. But they're not really around the world. And we'll see what we mean by that in a bit. Okay, they obviously lack Catholicity, for each of these churches is for the most part confined within the boundaries of a single country. If they do not possess Catholicity, by that very fact they necessarily lack that kind of unity which Christ bestowed upon his church. Unity of doctrine is again quite obviously missing in the Protestantism and considered as a totality. In fact, unity of doctrine cannot be found even in individual Protestant churches. Each of them, at least the large Protestant bodies, has always been split by internal divisions and subdivisions which have increased with time. There's nothing strange in this fact, seeing that the fundamental principle of Protestantism is private judgment, is a principle by which its very nature mitigates against unity. Neither should one overestimate the doctrinal unity of the Orthodox Church. While historically the Phocian churches have been substantially agreed in doctrine, in recent times they have shown some wavering tendencies. It is extremely remarkable that they have retained so much unity as in fact they display. This unity of faith, morals, and worship is undoubtedly due in some measure to lack of precision in definition and to a willingness to differ. In theory, the unity is complete. In fact, it is a substantial agreement which today shows some tendency to weaken. There are currents of opinion trickling towards Rome, towards Protestantism, towards modernism, and the weakening is due not a little to the close association of many of the churches with the civil power. That's a quote from Atwater. So, now I find that interesting. You see, the Phocian churches had just allowed themselves to become eroded in a number of smaller details, where one might be influenced by Protestants or others by modernists or what have you, and yet to a degree vastly surpassed, conspicuously surpassed by the Novus Ordo. The Novus Ordo, there is no unity of doctrine. You might get some Novus Ordo presiders who might still believe in the doctrine of transubstantiation. Some do, they may or may not have the ability to do it themselves. They may not even know understand they're not doing it themselves because they were never really ordained, or they're not using a valid form or even a valid matter in some cases. But they might still believe in the doctrine. Okay. But you got others who don't. And that's considered acceptable. That's perfectly acceptable. Don't believe me? Go tell, just tell them, you can find priests like that all over, the presiders, I should say, in the Novus Ordo, all over, who are like that. They will go up there and they'll tell you from the pulpit. It's a myth. It's a medieval story. It's a whatever. And you write to the bishop and say, oh, he said this. And the bishop writes back, assuming he bothers to write at all, so friggin' what? You don't care. That's acceptable there. It is acceptable because there's no unity of doctrine over there. You'd never get away with that, in the traditional Catholic Church. That's impossible here, just as with always, or what before was called the Roman Church in the old days. So, you see, that's really quite impossible. Now, as a matter of fact, continuing, page 183, as a matter of fact, in the Phocian churches in the 19th century, a fair number of the more educated clergy were imbued with both Protestantism and rationalism. Well, it says, I guess it's continuing the book here. No wonder, for it is a well-known fact that many of those who are called to direct and occupy the chairs of theological schools or to hold episcopal and metropolitan sees were educated in Protestant universities, especially the Protestant universities of Germany. Well, what do you expect? And the Novus Ordo doesn't mind installing people so educated in key posts and borrowing stuff like that and mixing with the Protestants all the time. So, of course, they're falling in the same way. Again, it is a note of real Catholicity to have a constant interest in the conversion of pagans by preaching the gospel to them. But the Orthodox Church is never bothered about the conversion of pagans. It feels no desire to convert them. It's a quote somewhere. So, and the Novus Ordo has abandoned that. I mean, what's the whole point of the Balaman Agreement but to say we don't need to convert you, you're okay? What's the point of all this, Irenicism and all this they let the Hindus be better Hindus and the Muslims be better Muslims, and that's good enough. You see, there's no need to convert. There's no conversion involved in that. This is what the Novus Ordo sometimes calls the new evangelism, which isn't evangelism in any real sense of the word. It's just, congratulations, you're a good person, you're fine being the Buddhist, the animist, the witch doctor, whatever you want to be. You see, that's the new ecumenism in a nutshell. They say, well, obviously, we of the traditional Catholic Church don't go along with that. We most certainly do believe that every kind of pagan needs to be converted. So, of course, right now, there's a big chunk of pagans that need to be converted that belong to the Novus Ordo, but there's a lot of other pagans, and they all need to be converted. And we alone accept that task. Our puny numbers, barely enough to do much anything, but we're what there is. God himself has contented to have so few people working for that. He'll have to explain that one. I'm not going to. Protestantism, on the other hand, while it was still a youthful and vigorous movement, did not even think about converting the pagans, and generally speaking, before the beginning of the 19th century, hardly moved a hand seriously to establish foreign missions. We must admit, however, that later on, and particularly after the middle of the 19th century, Protestants did establish foreign missions and did send a vast number of men and vast sums of money to found them. Some feel, however, that inasmuch as their missionaries, prescinding from a few noteworthy exceptions, were not outstanding for zeal and self-denial, their harvest of genuine conversions has been relatively modest. Yeah. The noteworthy exceptions footnote here, they talk about Albert Schweitzer, very famous. I mean, everybody's heard his name. But as this points out, he would hardly have been counted as a Protestant even by most Protestants today, because he was caught up in the misty world of, I'm quoting here, the misty world of liberal Protestantism into which he was born. He distinguishes between a Jesus of faith and a historical Jesus. So such a man, however great or noble he is, with his own special views of reverence for life, should rather be classified as a mystical humanitarian rather than as a Christian. So it's a rather interesting point. All right. Well, next we'll bring up Proposition 2. Thank you.